yelling out money, anything, ayy. Ooh, got the foot on the gas, pedal to the metal when I'm getting to the back, ayy. Got the foot on the gas, pedal to the metal when the lane moving fast, ayy. Ayy, let them all cross. If they hate, then let them hate and make a bigger boss, ayy.
What is up, ladies and gentlemen? We are back. We are live. It is the Freight Coach Podcast, the top podcast in transportation, coming to you guys every single weekday, 8:30 a.m. Pacific, 10:30 Central, to break down some industry headlines. But most importantly, you guys provide some actual insight into what you can do with all of this information. If this is your first time tuning in, welcome. This is the real side of freight, ladies and gentlemen. And I do say that before every single show. And what I mean by that is I only speak with transportation professionals, because at the end of the day, I want to talk to the right individuals who have done what you're looking to do or who are currently doing what you're trying to achieve. So you can take that information, apply it, utilize it, and see a meaningful difference in your business and your life. Happy Thursday, everybody. I got a couple of special guests for you guys on the show today. We're going to be talking about cyber, all of this fun stuff, and what we can do to really build up that profile behind a lot of the things that are going on out there in the market in regards to freight theft, identity theft, all of that stuff. And there's that my friends over at the NMFTA, they've created a threat report portal out there where we can all start kind of banding together to really help each other out as an industry and collaborate out there. So I got Mr. Joe Ohr and Ben Wilkens back on the show. You guys, thank you so much for taking the time to join me here this morning.
Thanks for having us.
Glad to be here.
Now I'm looking forward to it. It's cyber is, your guys' cybersecurity conference is admittedly my favorite conference to go to every single year now, because it's like I learned so much out there, and it's like the progression of everything that has been going on in the industry right now, and the direct correlation to cyber is it's like, I mean, you guys were in front of this by a few years, comparatively speaking, to the rest of the industry, and putting this information out there. And, with that being said, what was the, with the threat portal or the threat report portal, Joe, what was that real driving force behind the creation of this?
It really was based on feedback we got in the conference, to be honest with you. We looked at all the sharing that happened and how that sharing benefited other people. One person stood up from one of the top 5 LTL companies in America and said, you know what, I'd lean forward. If I know something is happening and I've seen it in my environment, I want to tell you. But I don't have the time to pick up the phone and call everyone. And then someone else stood up and said, yeah, I mean, there are things that I hear, whether it be freight fraud, whether it be cyber-enabled freight fraud, or whether it be cyber, and said, I want to tell people, I want to tell the industry, because we know these bad actors are attacking the industry. But how can we share this information? So the threat portal really came about because of that. It was the ability to quickly share information so that the peers within the industry can take notice. And I'll be honest, there's things that I learned since then when we were testing the threat portal that I've told my team, hey, we've got to watch out for this. Because, although we're not a carrier, we're not a broker, some of these same things are happening. People are attempting to get in and impact us every single day. So it's just a way to share. And then with freight fraud, it was the same thing. I mean, you were there last year when we were talking about the tequila heist. Yeah. We spent about a good 15 minutes saying, well, what could we have done to really have prevented that? And so the threat portal is also meant for NMFTA to take a look at the data, find some trends, and then figure out what can we do within our guidebooks and with our documentation to help other people be not impacted by this.
Yeah, I look at it, and I think one of the parallels I started drawing, this was a few years ago, with at one of the cyber conferences that I was at, is it's like the way that it used to happen. It's like it's a new breed of criminal that's out there, because they don't physically have to steal the freight anymore to benefit from it, right? It's just that simple redirection. And it's like in most companies' exposure, is a lot larger than they think to cyber events happening to their company. It's not just they're not just going after large logos. It's like it's like a faceless crime. There's no real human interaction, which kind of used to be the case, right? When they were stealing freight, the old cars would roll up and pop the seal on the back of a trailer at a truck stop. And now they can just redirect all of that stuff. So, Ben, you've got, you were a driver, right? Like, you've been on the front lines. You have a very unique skill set in this right now. So it's like, when we're dealing with hackers across the globe, is there any, what's the main motive on why they're attacking logistics? Or is it just there's so much, it's just they found so many loopholes that they can get access to this?
Well, you really hit it on the head, Chris. I mean, there's such a wide attack surface, and there's so many kind of soft spots in traditional defenses that we've had in the industry, and it's profitable, right? At the end of the day, these are financially motivated bad actors. And so if they find an industry or a niche in the industry where they can make a quick buck, and the repercussions aren't very serious sometimes, especially if they're operating from overseas, coordinating these attacks, the prosecution is difficult, and the penalties are not severe enough to really deter them. It doesn't outbalance the benefit of the financial gain that they've got. But it's definitely a symptom of historically insufficient security controls on our technology in the industry that's really fueling this opportunity for them.
And the one thing I'll add to that is, I think, all three of us have been in this industry at a different level for over 20 years. And I think what's attracted us to this industry is just it's open, open arms. I know that when I first started, the carriers were like so nice. It's a trusting industry. And I think what brings us to the industry, keeps us in the industry, is also what brings the bad actors to the industry, because it is an industry built on trust. And so there's not as much of a verifying trust. It's more you lead with trust. I think what's made the industry great is also what's created Achilles' heel for the industry when it comes to cyber.
Yeah, it's, I look at it now where it's, the exposure is so much greater the more digital all of these transactions get out there in the market. And, it's like as much of a fan of technology as I am, a lot of people sign up for technology, but they don't ask critical questions about the protection of their data, the protection of the system itself, and how vulnerable are ELDs and TMSs and everything else out there for an attack. Because it's like, one of the things that I learned is it's not as much of a quick grab and cash out and go mentality anymore. Is a lot of these guys seemingly are sitting there behind the scenes collecting data. They have trucks on the road now themselves, right? And they're sitting there and they're doing the right thing for a long time. And then that trust is there, and then boom, there's 10 truckloads that are stolen out of one plant and everything. Like it's a lot more in depth than people think. But I also look at it people are inherently lazy. I'm not saying, but like, let's be honest. Most people want the path of least resistance in every single situation out there. And that's why it's like, for me, with the threat report portal, I would almost, I don't want to say guarantee, I would bet a very high percentage that a lot of the companies out there who are talking behind the scenes, a lot of similarities are happening between these events, right? And there's probably I don't want to call it a playbook, but there's probably a lot of parallels that are drawn where it's like, hey, boom, we're noticing this. This is a change that we can make to thwart that, so they don't even get it into our system.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, Ben. I saw you open your mouth and then I spoke first.
No worries.
And that's the thing with the threat portal is when Marley and we've been doing these calls with Freight Fraud Prevention Hub, and we've done over probably 50 calls, and these are real stories. I mean, these are ones where you've got people almost in tears. They've lost they've lost their business or on the verge of losing their business. And then we hear people say, hey, I'll give you an example. There was pilfering of tires, and in the company, it was a large company, they're probably losing $100,000 a month. It took them 6 months to figure this out. And we've heard the same thing with liquor. You know, they go somewhere, they drop off, you know, maybe as a case or a pallet of liquor. Well, they'd edit the bill of lading. You know, it was all documented. The problem that these guys mentioned was, I know when I stop it, they're going to go to the next carrier and do the same thing. And then when that carrier catches it, they'll go to the next, because they stop it, but they never get it prosecuted. To Ben's point, if it is, they're out. It's just not significant. And so they're just moving on. To your point, they're lazy. And it's like, okay, I'll do it for 6 months. I get caught, then I go to the next person. I may get them for 2 or 3 months, then I move on. The list is endless of carriers to attack.
Yeah, and you mentioned something too, Chris. You mentioned the playbook, and it's interesting because each of these bad actors, they really do have a playbook that they follow. You know, they find the process that works, and they're going to use it over and over. You know, until it doesn't work, then they'll make adjustments. But that's really what we're trying to capture with the threat report portal. Is when one carrier sees there may be a new technique being used, if we can disseminate that information out to the rest of the industry quickly, then that new playbook that the bad actor is trying to use is going to be less effective. You know, it's going to harden the entire surface of the industry. And that's really the trick, is highlighting those techniques and those tactics that the threat actor is using, and making sure that everybody ups their defenses before they even see this in their own environment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's. You know, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, no, Chris, and you mentioned data. I think that's a really important point a lot of people forget. Know who owns your data. If you're working with a telematics company, you're working with a TMS company, you're working with a video-based safety company, know who owns your data. Do they own your data? Do you own your data? You should own your data. And or if you're working with somebody that posts location information or truck information, maybe it's for a load board, maybe it's something else. I don't want to mention any names, but know who has your data, and they have to follow the same stringent offboard processes, the same stringent cyber processes, and have the same cyber hygiene that you do. I know that every RFP that we do has a cyber section, because we don't want to do business with someone who does not have the same cyber hygiene as us. Plus, we want to know what happens to our data, because if there's a breach and we've given them data, then we're breached also. So you really want to know, you want to follow the trail of your data, and you want to know how often do they cleanse that data? What's their, you know, do they keep it for 2 years? Do they keep it for 3 years? Do they keep it for 6 months? You've got to know everybody who has access to your data, what they do with the data, how they secure the data. We've actually exited contracts because they couldn't answer those questions. And I think as an industry, carriers are getting better about asking those questions, and shippers, but it's still few and far between. I mean, it really wasn't even a thing 5 years ago. I think probably 8 years ago, I walked into a top carrier in the US. It was the first time I've ever been asked a cybersecurity question. And they were great questions. And so we see it more of a focus now, but it's not with all the carriers and all the shippers. It's just with some strategic. But know your data and trace it.
Yeah, I look at it where, you know, I think we're coming up to a point, and I think this isn't just like a carrier or a broker thing. I think that this is going to affect manufacturers and shippers out there as well. Is there's going to be a lot of businesses, I think, in the not so distant future that are going to be uninsurable, because I was talking to somebody this week where, they're aware of a company out there that's losing anywhere from $5 to $7 million a year in freight, right? Like it's being stolen from, like, at what point is it uninsurable? At what point is that a thing out there where it's like, if you're going to be purchasing it, you're going to have to self-insure, your premiums are going to go up. And I don't think it has to get to that point though, right? Like I think that we need to, collectively, because like I've talked about this, a lot of what I see, and again, it's like I've been on the front lines for a long time. I've been booking freight for a long time, talking about the laziness factor of a lot of it. I can tell in about 10 seconds if the person that I'm talking to on the other end of the phone is legitimate or not. It's really not that hard for somebody like myself to spot out there. And for me, it's like we got to get to that point though, where we're collectively smarter as an industry working together here to stop this. And it's almost like we got to put the guard down here for a little bit. I mean, we had our friends at Estes on the show here, Joe, a couple months back, and they were like the most transparent organization when it comes down to when they had their cyber attack that was out there. So it's like, I want companies to think like, hey, if a company of that size is willing to come out and publicly speak about this stuff, what's stopping you, right? Like what's stopping you from going out there and putting those best practices out there? Because as an industry, if we have a set standards that we can operate off of, we're going to minimize this stuff, right? Like I'm never going to be naive to say like, oh, crime's going to go away. Like, let's be honest, it's not going to go away, but like we can stay ahead of this stuff. And I think that's what most people are kind of missing, because, they are thinking, they're like, if this happens or this happened, I'm losing my business. I'm losing everything, my home, my family's going to be, all of that stuff. Like it's a very real emotional thing, but it's like, that's why it's so important to get in on this stuff and do your research and see like, if like, again, that strategy, that playbook that they're operating off of, it's very evident to me. And so it's like for that, what are some of those things though, that Ben, from a cyber perspective, that you are identifying that like companies can do to protect their organizations?
Well, I think the number one thing, and this has been my answer for a long time, probably still will remain that way, is education, right? We don't know how to defend against what we aren't prepared for. And so I always say, start with education, educate your teams on the techniques that are being used, on what to look out for, what the risks are. And, don't treat it as like a one-off training we do, every 6 months or every year. It's got to be regular, ongoing, and it's got to be tailored to the realities of our operations, right? So anti-phishing training that works well at a hospital or a bank isn't tailored to transportation. We need to talk in transportation terms. So that would be number one. And then, followed by, all of the core cybersecurity kind of baseline cyber hygiene defenses, things like multi-factor authentication on everything. Strong password policies. Joe mentioned earlier, strong offboarding. That's huge. Don't let people leave your organization and maintain their access to your systems or to your load boards. We see all the time passwords shared across teams where there's one login that multiple people will use. We've got to stop those kinds of practices. That's a huge vulnerability, particularly when someone leaves the organization. If those credentials aren't rotated properly, changing those credentials when somebody leaves, that leaves an open door. And it's quite often poor hygiene when it comes to these types of credentials and protecting your credentials that lets the bad actors in. It gets them into email accounts, it gets them into your load boards, your TMS systems, things like that. So it's really start with the education and follow, at the same time, you've got to do the baseline hygiene, and then keep yourself aware of how the landscape is changing. And that's really the design behind the threat portal, is understand that this isn't a static environment. This isn't like what's happening today is what you need to protect against, because it's going to be different tomorrow and it's going to change again the day after that. So we need to understand that we need to be kind of fluid in our defensive stance as well, to change with that changing landscape.
Is there any, the FMCSA released their new onboarding stuff here. It's Modus system that got released here. How much of this do you guys think is like the current system, the old system? I know there's going to be an integration phase out there. How much of this is it's kind of like being allowed at that level where it's like people can go in there and, get access to, there's a couple of different examples here in I'm going to tie it all together, I promise. But it's like, you go out there and there's companies who they're selling their authority, right? Like out on Facebook and everything else, and they're getting those credentials. They're getting access to the FMCSA database. They're unknowingly potentially selling their business to a scam operation, right? And then do you think now with this new onboarding process and existing things, like, are you guys tracking any of this stuff in the threat report portal? Is those chameleon operations where, a lot of them are probably using same style email addresses, same style phone numbers, everything. Again, that there's those patterns that are out there. Is a lot of that information in there? Because as great as the new Modus system is, it's a multi-phase rollout that's going to happen. So it's like, it's stopping the new ones from gaining access potentially, but there's a lot of existing information that's behind the scenes right now. So it's like, is that some of those things that people can really look into, where it's like, hey, this email address is now associated with 7 different trucking companies?
Yeah, that's part of what we're tracking, particularly in the, because we do have the reporting portal kind of segmented into straight cyber events and then cargo crime related events, and there's ways to input that exact data when you're reporting any kind of a cargo crime or freight fraud or identity fraud. We provide an opportunity to collect, whether it's a company name, a driver involved, an email domain, or a website that was used. Any of that information will be captured in these reports, and then that is disseminated back out to the industry. So anyone that's participating in the threat report portal will immediately receive those email accounts, those domains that are being used, the names of the companies that were used in any kind of a cargo crime or freight fraud situation. So that will absolutely help alert the next carrier or the next broker to say, hey, watch out for this company. This is not a legitimate company. This is a company engaging in fraud.
We're also looking at, even before that happens, these are all sold on the dark web, right? Some of them aren't even sold on the dark web. They're sold more wide open. So I think the other thing is, can we get to that intel? So we're talking to a couple folks from a partnership perspective to say, okay, how can we get this data? We get a lot of the data now related to cyber attacks and things that are reported. And I know, like, for us, it comes to dark web looking for information to make sure that there's nothing there that could be damaging to us. But could we do the same thing for MC numbers, DOT numbers? So we're also looking at that and adding that as an enhancement into the threat portal. We're not there yet, but I think if we could be proactive about it and find when these things are for sale, and then actually alert the folks that are signed up in the threat portal, and even take it further. I mean, could we alert FMCSA? And I think, to your point, FMCSA DOT is much more aggressive with this, but to think that they can do this alone, I think is not wise. They're going to need help, and so if we can help, or another person in the industry can help and say, hey, here's what we're seeing. That's one of the things we want to do. And we want to do the same thing with the threat portal.
Yeah, because I think that, again, if you're legitimately selling your business, like you have lawyers, you're going through a business broker, like there's a set, like it's very clearly documented at that point. But it's like, how do we take that information that's on the dark web, that's, or even Facebook, right? Because, like, that's the thing. I feel like if you're trying to sell your business over Facebook, like, that's the biggest red flag if somebody comes out to you and says, hey, I'm going to buy your company, right? Like, let's be honest. So with taking all of this data, and having some form of partnership with the FMCSA and the DOT, do you think, again, and Ben, from a cyber perspective, is there a way that maybe they could protect the businesses, or, like, stop it from transferring certain information to where it would almost make it impossible to sell the company on that back channel way? Is there any way to do that? Maybe it's my naivety that's coming out here, but I'm like, there's got to be a way to like, hey, this company was sold through this way, blacklist, something out there to stop a lot of that.
Yeah, I mean, that's the $1 million question, isn't it? I mean, it's one of those things where identification of the company that's been sold and kind of the legitimacy of, like you mentioned, that you can really determine the legitimacy of the transaction fairly easily once you see the venue that it was sold in and those kinds of things. But then also having that kind of early warning alerting system that, hey, these are the, because it's not necessarily an immediate blacklist if you've sold your company. Like you said, there are legitimate purposes for selling a company, but we need to have kind of a warning that this company's recently been sold, and we kind of want to re-vet them, right? Not just because we've worked with them in the past, accept that information again. So I think it's really about the notification system. This has been sold. Re-vet this carrier, this broker, and then monitor their behavior ongoing. And if we start to see those other signs of potential fraud, we need to then go from a kind of a alert status to be very careful utilizing this entity.
Yeah. I almost, it's either that or it's the purchasing entity of it as well, right? Start tracking who's the one who's actually like buying all of these companies up, because I would assume, again, back to the inherent laziness that most people are, I would assume it's the handful of IP addresses or a handful of email addresses that are associated with all of that stuff. Because again, if you're legally selling your business, right, like there's a bill of sale, there's like an actual paperwork process that needs to be filed with the state and feds and everything else. And it's not just because I think like this is one of those things that they're not like, the person who's selling it is essentially getting a cash transfer or whatever, and they're transferring the information. They're not actually technically selling the business. They're transferring the business over, and unknowingly everything is still in that individual's name, but they got 25 grand or 30 grand, hypothetical example. And they're like going off about their life, but they don't realize now is they're still on the hook in the event that company somehow does something illegal. That business is still in their name, and they're going to be brought into that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, when it's not an actual transfer of the assets and the business liabilities and all of that, it isn't really a sale. You're selling access. You're selling the ability to operate as, in that kind of chameleon state. But and you bring up an interesting point when you talk about the change of like if you take IP addresses, where the logins are occurring, that is something that people should be monitoring in their systems. Is where are people trying to access your systems from? There's VPNs can mask that to a certain extent, but there are ways to detect if VPNs are being used, and that can be kind of a red flag. Because a lot of these actors are operating from overseas. That's kind of low-hanging fruit to say, hey, if there's a login from overseas, we need to look into this. There's, again, legitimate reasons for that potentially, but it's a red flag. It's something that should be investigated further.
Yeah, that, or like I said, if they're using a VPN to hide where their location is and everything, that should be another red flag out there. Is it
right?
Because like, again, I'm an idiot when it comes to all this stuff, Ben. Is it very much listed like, hey, this is utilizing a VPN? Is it like somehow documented where somebody with a trained eye like yourself would be able to pick that up instantly?
There's ways to detect it. It's more kind of known address blocks that belong to certain VPN services is a good way to pick that up. There's other kind of technical detection methods, but that's the easiest way, is kind of the known addressing blocks. It's the same thing that that the streaming companies, your Netflix and your Amazon and all those types of things do to detect, hey, you're using a VPN, you can't stream our services because we can't determine if you're in an area we're licensed for or not. It's the same kind of idea that can be utilized in the transportation space.
So we're seemingly just a couple of steps away from doing what streaming services do to block access to their content out there. No, yeah. I look at it now where it's like, it's not just the way it, when it came down to like double brokering, and like I was joking the other couple of weeks ago. I was like, man, I miss the days when the double brokers would just like take $200 and they'd still actually pick up and deliver the load for you. It's seemingly just gotten out of hand here.
Yeah, it's pretty bad when you're nostalgic for the good old days of straight cargo crime, right?
Oh, perfect. Well, hey, Joe, Ben, I really appreciate it. The best way for everybody to come out to this is, either go to the NMFTA website, or do you guys have a specific login for the threat report portal that you'd like everybody to go to check this out?
Yeah, we do. We'll be doing a press release on it, but if you go to nmfta.org, you will see a link to the threat portal. We'll be adding that shortly, in addition to doing some press releases.
Perfect. Sounds great. Well, hey, I appreciate your guys' time today. If you guys can't find that out there, hit me up. I will gladly put you guys in contact with the NMFTA about this. Again, you guys, it's got to come from us as the industry. We got to collectively work together to stay ahead of a lot of these things out there. As always, if you got value in what you heard and you're not subscribed, subscribe to the show, you guys. And if you're feeling ambitious, rank it on iTunes and Spotify, because if you see value, your network's going to see it as well. I appreciate you guys. I love you guys, and we'll be talking to you soon.
Came back with a bang, window down, yelling out money, anything. Hey, ooh, got the foot on the gas, pedal to the metal when I'm getting to the back. Hey, got the foot on the gas, pedal to the metal when the lane moving fast.